Today we're going to talk about the top 10 best things about Heroes in Crisis, and I'm already dead inside. Oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. Hello everyone and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're going to try and see if I can weave straw into gold. Now a while ago, longtime Patreon contributor Jeremy Renfro asked me to make this video, perhaps deliberately knowing the inevitable results. Because I've made it well known that I hate Heroes in Crisis. As in, I truly despise everything it said and ultimately stood for. You know what? I need to stop myself right there. This is a happy video about happy things like Comic Island. You should subscribe to it and get that notification thing going and all that stuff. So this video presents a very interesting challenge, but one I'm kind of embracing. Can I talk about an event I didn't like in a positive way? Did I find 10 things to legitimately talk about in a story that I ultimately hate? And the short answer is yes, even if I might have to stretch things for the first few rounds in this top 10. But I feel we truly have to at least briefly review what Heroes in Crisis was all about. Not everyone might remember what happened or have even read the story, so it's a good idea to go over everything. If that's a problem for anyone, you can go ahead and skip to this time code for the top 10 proper. So, Heroes in Crisis. Oh, right, I have no idea what happens in this story. I'm sorry, I'm usually good at deciphering even the worst comic book nonsense, but I just don't get what goes on in Heroes in Crisis at all. I get lost in the second half of this story every time I try to explain it, I get frustrated, and then I give up in some amusing way. That's what's happened on every occasion I've tried to talk about Heroes in Crisis on this channel before, and it's what's going to happen if I try now. So instead I'm just going to read word for word the Wikipedia plot section for Heroes in Crisis, and maybe you can figure it out for yourself. It makes more sense than the actual comic does anyways. Sanctuary is a secret rehabilitation center for superheroes and reformed supervillains dealing with mental health issues. A horrible massacre claims the lives of nearly all its patients, including Arsenal, Blue Jay, Commander Steel, Hotspot, Lagoon Boy, Gunfire, Red Devil, Narc, Protector, Tattooed Man, Wally West, and Poison Ivy. Booster Gold and Harley Quinn become prime suspects as they are the only survivors of this event. As neither of them remember how it happened, they both believe the other did it and attempt to kill each other. Batman deduces one of the Sanctuary patients was responsible for the killings and seeks to catch the mysterious figure dubbed the Puddler. However, he cannot access Sanctuary's AI program. When they track down Harley Quinn, she tricks Wonder Woman and threatens to break Batman's neck unless they allow her to escape. While Booster contacts Ted Kord about Wally's corpse, Harley consults Batgirl about chasing Booster. Lois Lane shares with her husband that she has been mysteriously receiving confessions of the murdered superheroes. She later reveals Sanctuary's existence and its purpose. The revelation generates fear of superheroes among masses. Superman admits Sanctuary's existence in public, requesting that they not mistrust them despite their issues. In response, most of the heroes and their loved ones berate and accuse them for allowing the massacre to happen. After Booster and Harley settle their differences, he reveals Wally's corpse from 5 days in the future, which leads them to believe the real Wally is still alive. That theory is proven true as the present-day Wally revives Ivy from her rose and apologizes to her for causing harm in the first place. The truth is, Wally caused the massacre by accident. Still grappling with the trauma related to having his family erased in the New 52, he convinced himself that he was alone in his grief, and that Sanctuary was created by the Justice League solely for him out of pity. Desperate to find the truth about which other heroes were being treated by Sanctuary, he somehow broke into its AI program to retrieve the Sanctuary patient data, entailing all of their collective trauma. This discovery overwhelms Wally and it causes him to lose control of the Speed Force, which unleashes an energy blast that kills almost everyone at Sanctuary. In a desperate attempt to buy himself 5 days to fix his mistake, he altered the scene to make it look like either Booster or Harley committed the crime, making up the Puddler persona. Wally then records a tape confessing his crimes as well as his secret identity and sends it to Lois. Booster, Harley, Blue Beetle, and Batgirl arrive at Sanctuary prepared to save Wally. Using their combined detective skills, they understand that he is the culprit but also a victim. Harley is reunited with Poison Ivy and tells her that she was regrown by the Green. Meanwhile, Wally is prepared to kill himself so that he can maintain a continuous loop, in which he stages the murder scene so that he can expose Sanctuary to Lois, and then kill himself again to restart the loop. Wally is afraid that he will create another flashpoint if he attempts to rescue those he kills. Booster suggests that he can close the time loop if they clone Wally's body in the far future and use that body for the crime scene rather than his real body. Wally agrees to this admittedly wild plan so he can hold himself responsible for the manslaughter, find a way to make up for it, and eventually move on. In the end, Wally contemplates his fate while in the Justice League prison, determining that hope is not denying his pain, but carrying that pain with him as he keeps on running. Jesus Christ, that's the longest Wikipedia plot summary I've ever read of anything! I'm gonna need some sort of cue to keep me happy as we get through this mess.
Puppy dog, bounce it in the box like this. Don't stop, don't stop. Bounce with it. You a good little puppy. You don't live on the street.
Okay, that'll work. Yeah, that's good. Now, I did say I had to stretch things ever so slightly to accommodate finding 10 good things to talk about with Heroes in Crisis. Nevertheless, the stretch only happens for the first couple of rounds, and even then, it's hardly much of a stretch. Heroes in Crisis was delivered issue after issue on time without any sort of meaningful delays, or disastrous printing errors throughout the publication of these comics. Lots of other titles, both better and worse, including many DC crossover events, have suffered from far greater delays, and given all the work that goes into putting a miniseries like this together, it is impressive how this story was clearly planned out, prepared for, and executed professionally. That's worth adulation in my books. Hot on the heels of that last point, in spite of quite a bit of backlash, fairly early on, from critics and fans including myself, Tom King and DC held firm behind this story. This was a project they believed in, even if people like me thoroughly rejected it. And I can definitely respect somebody who stands by their work in spite of criticism, rather than somebody who instantly collapses under the weight of it. There have been event comics in the past where DC and Marvel have changed things moments before or during publication, either due to infighting behind the scenes, or in response to a certain aspect of public reaction to earlier issues of the story. Heroes in Crisis didn't do that, even though they had ample reason to do that, and even though I fundamentally disagree with the story and what it was saying and where it ultimately went, trying to fix things halfway through would have probably only made things worse. Closely related to that last point is how Tom King has always kind of stood behind this story. He hasn't been dismissive of readers and critics who have expressed dissatisfaction with Heroes in Crisis, and even if I disagree with it, I definitely recognize it wasn't coming from a negative place in terms of what he was going for. Heroes in Crisis is a lot of things, but it is not intentionally offensive, and it would be wildly inappropriate to expect Tom King to apologize for a story just because I and others didn't care for it. I've always liked that aspect of Tom King as a writer. He handles controversial stories very well. He never talks down to his critics, but he doesn't apologize for his writing either. A lot of comic book writers could learn from how he handles this stuff, while plenty of others are just as professional. But I will always prefer a writer who can handle this sort of criticism over one who loses their mind when faced with it. Both Marvel and DC, but especially DC, have been pretty ugly when it comes to how they have historically dealt with mental health issues, and the way they've depicted them in their works over the years. Yes, it is inherently a function of time and changes in cultural norms, but Heroes in Crisis and stories like it are needed to bridge the gap between the old world of mentally ill people all being locked up in a spooky asylum to the far more integrated, complex, nonviolent, and nuanced reality of today. Heroes in Crisis didn't quite stick the landing of its message, but I give it a ton of credit for at least trying to tackle an issue that sadly Marvel and DC still need to find better ways to deal with in future storytelling without turning everyone into a depressed emo character. Because we've been down that route too. Now here is another cool part of Heroes in Crisis. It's just full of neat ideas. A farm where superheroes can deal with their mental health issues in peace. The balance between Lois Lane's role as a journalist against the ethics of these superheroes' right to privacy, especially when it comes to their own mental condition. And even centering a DC event around a murder mystery. These are all very interesting ideas worth exploring further, even beyond the scope of Heroes in Crisis. I'd balk at the execution of some of these ideas, but at their core, they're very cool ideas to begin with. And that gives Heroes in Crisis a certain degree of true value, as it introduces the concepts for the DC universe. Just because they didn't fully work here doesn't mean they won't work again in the future. And that also makes this kind of story great for adaptation, since, while it's hard to argue that there's value here already, adaptation can bring out these great ideas and truly try and make them work. I do appreciate that aspect of Heroes in Crisis, and there are plenty of good examples of this sort of adaptation working well in creating a valuable story where there really wasn't one before. Hopefully one day that's true of Heroes in Crisis as well. Now we're getting into some of my favorite aspects of Heroes in Crisis. It's just because I didn't like the overall story doesn't mean that there aren't parts of it that I just loved. And one of the biggest aspects of that is the art in various forms. One form that really stands out is the color. Heroes is bright and colorful, with much of the most striking panels and pages taking place in the pastures of the Sanctuary Farm. With the bulk of the artwork being done by Clay Mann, I just have to give special commendation to the striking pastel colors that exist throughout this series. It's gorgeous, and I could watch and read superhero stories that look like this pretty much indefinitely. I prefer a better story, sure, but I really did love the coloring of Heroes in Crisis. Speaking of Clay Mann and the artwork, I really don't have any problems with his work in this series. My problems are specifically with the story. But Clay Mann, a longtime veteran of comics, is kind of showing off some of his best work here, and not just in the coloring. The design and facial expressions of the characters, the creative way he does titles like this on this amazing page, and so many more are offered by Clay Mann. And it should be noted, a lot of the stuff we've talked about so far, how this comic didn't suffer from any major publication issues or any big delays, well, Clay Mann is a huge part of that too. Yes, I am stretching art over these three categories, but it is a huge part of what works in this comic, and I am being specific with these three things. The coloring is amazing, as are other individual components of Clay Mann's work, but it also comes together very well, and largely works well with the project to begin with in terms of pairing the art with the story. A lot of stories like this would look very different visually, and they have, from both Marvel and DC in the past. The colors would be way darker, consisting of nighttime shading, with lots of blacks and blues. But Heroes in Crisis, well, its art is in a sense at odds with itself. A dark story mixed with bright and hopeful looking art. That isn't an accident, and in fact it's very well handled. It's a deliberate contrast that works so well in conveying the exact theme and tone this overall story needed. Again, I don't like the story, but I can appreciate how expertly crafted the artwork is tailored towards it, especially on the part of Clay Mann. If you had told me without any of the other context or information about this story that we were going to get something with the DC Trinity, that was going to be them trying to solve this murder mystery while also heavily involving characters like Batgirl, Harley Quinn, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, the Flash family, Poison Ivy, and Lois Lane, that it would be a fairly straightforward story without a lot of tie-ins or insane action, and that it would be an honest attempt to tackle mental health issues. Well, I'd be pretty damn excited about that story. These are really cool characters, many of whom don't get much of a chance in the spotlight or haven't in some time. It was great to see Blue Beetle and Booster Gold reunited, while Batgirl and Harley Quinn were featured so heavily in a major DC event. Of course, half of those characters got gaslit to oblivion while Wally West became a mass murderer.
Don't need no leash. All your shots up to date, you ain't got no fleas. Bounce it puppy like you're trying to get free.
Right. Happy thoughts. Almost at the finish line. Happy thoughts. Almost there. Where were we? If it hasn't been apparent from this video so far, my biggest frustration with Heroes in Crisis is how much I wanted it to succeed in what it was trying to do to begin with. Unfortunately, I don't think Heroes in Crisis escaped the superhero trap in terms of how these stories depict people with mental health issues, because once again, a main character is shown to have these issues, and in response to it, he violently kills half a dozen people. Now don't get me wrong, I ain't got no problem with mentally ill, violent characters like the Joker, or really the entirety of Batman's Rogues Gallery, or any other character like that, hero or villain. But I am saying, in a story that sort of breaches the veil behind the superheroes and their overall mental health, that shows us they're all suffering, it really truly sucks that one of them has to suddenly be a murderer at the same time. And not just anyone either, but Wally West! The Wally West from pre-New 52, what I think to say was once the symbol of the now dead idea of DC Rebirth, to be replaced by whatever comes next, while sadly leaving some of the best and most important ideas and themes of Rebirth behind with it. I really wish this story was done well instead of so inappropriately and with such an ugly choice behind the mystery. And the shame of it all is that it feels close. Very nearly not just good, but great, or perhaps even important and influential. And I feel like if it had just been thought through a little bit better, it could have worked so much more effectively. For example, this whole thing really didn't have to be about murder. Sanctuary could have detected a data breach, and it could have still been a curious Wally West, frustrated with all of his hang-ups over the New 52, still desperate to seek out the identities of those in Sanctuary, even though it's a gross violation of their privacy. But in his fatigue, he accidentally leaks it to Lois Lane. And then we let the rest of the story play out pretty much the same, with the Trinity trying to contain the massive data breach of sensitive personal data about dozens of superheroes, if not way more, while also having the character conflict in trying to find who is responsible for this leak, with suspects like Harley Quinn and Booster Gold still being chased down. And then let everything else just sort of work out the same, with Wally West having to be confronted and dealing with all these issues, with everyone recognizing this sort of crime, but us not having to take it to the 10 millionth degree, and Wally West not having irrevocably become a murderer. My point being, it feels like Tom King, in spite of the admirable trait of standing by his work, could have done a lot better with that work. I thought of my version in like 10 minutes. It's basically the same story. The stakes are a little bit lower, but seem pretty high to me given that villains could probably use that information to wreak havoc on the heroes, either by finding out their secret identities through this data breach or knowing their hang-ups in terms of psychology and being able to take care of that in a vicious way. The extreme nature of Wally's actions undermine the most important ideas behind Heroes in Crisis, which is a shame, because I am still getting at a positive point here. Those ideas that just about every superhero there is has been dealing with trauma or mental illness in some form or another this whole time, and given that their careers are so traumatic and they lose people and see so much crazy stuff, that sort of makes sense to me, and that the public needs to accept this rather than approach it from a place of fear or mistrust, much like how in the real world we need to do the same for the mentally ill. There are important messages that I see an awful lot of value in at play in Heroes in Crisis. So when Wally West absorbs all the crazy of everybody else in Sanctuary, and then the combined crazy causes him to become a mass murderer, it seems almost pathetically obvious to me that this story is at odds with itself, and that's...
So brother, you could chill with a tree. I could leave you in your cage and you won't even pee. You could fetch a ball, but you ain't...
Right. I'm sorry. It's hard to talk about Heroes in Crisis without talking about the negatives, and it's really hard to talk about the positives when we're talking about the things it's attempting to do, and to try and give it credit for these things without talking about the fact that it failed at its attempt. So I did get negative a little bit at the end there, I admit, but there's no way around it. The best part about Heroes in Crisis, it fails at, and I don't know any way of talking about that without getting into why that is, and it would be dishonest to just say that it was a good thing without reconciling it with the fact that, yeah, it tried to present the mentally ill in a positive manner, but failed horribly. So, bad. You know, what this story did to Harley Quinn, it's fun to talk a little bit about the positives here and stuff, but I've always been really bothered by what this story did to Harley Quinn in particular, because it makes Wally West into such this vicious and disgusting, gaslighting, psychopathic, mass murderer that we're supposed to pity. God damn it, DC! Can we not have anything good for more than 2 years? What the f*** was this story? Tom King is a mother